welcome to our talk that we did at Project Challenge as our final talk of the afternoon. We're going to be talking about 7 habits of highly effective PMO managers. So we're going to be looking at kind of 7 habits of those effective PMO managers, stolen shamelessly from Stephen Covey's 7 habits of highly effective individuals. So there'll be 2 of us doing the talk. Some will be done by myself, Eileen Roden, and the other half is going to be done by Lindsay Scott. So as we start the kind of presentation, we thought it was really quite important that we spend a little bit of time actually kind of looking at the title of the talk and clarifying we all understand the terms that we're going to be using. So the 3 terms that are really important to be defined are, firstly, it's going to be habit. We're then going to look at behaviour, and we're then going to look at effective. So let's first look at defining what a habit actually is. So standard dictionary definition, and what we find when we look up what a habit is, it is a routine of behaviour that is repeated regularly and tends to occur subconsciously. So it's not something that we do as a one-off, it's something that we do repeatedly, and we often don't think about what we're doing, it's just something that we do as a matter of course because we've been doing it kind of for so long.
Whether it's snoring, always kind of leaving the bathroom in a mess, we tend to know for our habits and the things that we do. So the second thing that we wanted to define was behaviour, because very often people kind of get confused about behaviour, and it does become very important when we start thinking about feedback later on. So a behaviour, yes, we say the way in which one acts or conducts oneself, especially towards others. Now I think that's quite a pompous definition of behaviour, and there's a much easier one around behaviour, which is the things that you say and the things that you do. Okay? So it's got nothing to do about how you feel, and it's got nothing to do with how you think. It's about what people see that you do and what people hear that you say. Okay? So even if we're in a foul mood, we can still smile and say hello to people when we walk in the office. Yes? And what they'll say is, that's really good, yes? They came in, they smiled and they said hello. They're not making judgments on what we're thinking or how we're feeling at the time. They're making judgments on what we say and what we do. So when we're talking about habits, these are things that we say and things that we do on a regular basis that have become kind of subconscious. It becomes our natural kind of way of behaving. And the other important word is effective. Okay? So again, we'll go for the dictionary definition. So it says successful in producing a desired or intended result. Now, there is one kind of difficulty around taking this definition as it stands, okay? Because the important thing around being effective is we want to continue to be effective, okay? So the way that we behave has to continue to be successful in producing a desired or intended result. There is no point, yes, in dragging something out of a project manager and you know you can never go and speak to them ever again, yes? Because next month, you've got to try and get the same report out of them again. So in order to be effective and truly effective, it's not just about the now, it's about that continuous piece of getting our desired or intended results. And I think the other thing is we're just going to put a kind of a health warning on here, yes? Sometimes good behaviour is not always rewarded in the workplace. I would like to say it is. I would like to say every organisation recognises, rewards and promotes people who demonstrate good behaviour. Yes? An awful lot of organisations actually don't do that and proliferate bad behaviour, yes, in terms of kind of their choice for who gets what jobs and what activities. So as we go through, it's worth kind of thinking what the potential implications are, but I would still advocate we should be demonstrating these kind of 7 habits, these 7 behaviours of PMO managers. So Lindsay's going to do the first few.
Okay, just so everybody's aware that anything that you see here today, and you want to, take a photo of it, actually it'll all be on the PMOFlashmob website. This entire presentation will be on there, plus the presentation and everything else. So don't worry about that. Let's start. Okay, so habit number 1, listen first to understand. This, for me, is about the kind of PMO managers that I talk to on a regular basis, obviously through Flashmobs, and also through my day job around recruiting around PMO people, is that you can really tell when somebody's got this. And it's a great habit. And it's one of those that, as you practice it and learn and cultivate it, actually makes a big difference to your role as a PMO manager. So, so my first one, active listening. Again, it's something that you probably know about, but actually, how much do you know about it, and what forms does it take, and what can you do? What kind of skills that might be you might be able to develop? The thing for me that I really like is the one there that's questioning. And actually, from a PMO manager's point of view, you think about all the types of communication that you do, day in, day out, but actually, how good are you at the questioning side just as much as the active listening side? So the types of questions, the leading, the open, the closing, and the reflective. So like I said, it's something that I see actively in people and regularly see them, and you can tell that they've really thought about this and how they put themselves across both as they speak and as they listen. Where does it really matter? Well, if we look at the landscape of a PMO manager's position and a role, if we compare that to project managers, for example, actually a PMO manager's reach is probably just that little bit far-reaching. So we have to have interrelationships with execs. And the interesting thing that came out of a PMO manager's lunch that we held back in December, it became clear that actually what the PMO managers were saying around that table is that often it's about having to try and listen. What are they really asking for, these executives? Because often what they think they're asking for is not what they really want. And I think that really demonstrates why we've got this as number 1 habit. Obviously, we work across the organisation in some PMOs. So we think about, well, who are these people that we're interacting with? That could be HR, it could be finance, it could be ops, it could be legal. And actually, how are we listening and questioning these kinds of people? When it comes to things like PMO functions and services, you think about all the different aspects of what we deliver in PMO. Think about all the things like we do in terms of things like putting templates together, standards, processes, methods. How do we do this? We don't do it in a vacuum. So who are we listening to? Who are we talking to? We've obviously got wider stakeholders. And as a PMO manager, they've also got a team. And we all know what it can be like about managing teams of people, but often you don't get the real message from your team for whatever reason. So it's the ability to listen to what's not being said. And then the whole body language piece and all that kind of thing. But also as the outside world. So when people come to things like PMO Flashmobs, actually, you can get a really good sense for people as to how they engage with other people, other PMO managers in that kind of environment. Do they ask questions? Do they listen? And you can really see the subtleties of some people. So it's an interesting one for me. It's a great habit. And actually, it's something that you can look at, learn more. And actually, what I've done is pulled out from some of these PMO managers, what do they do? What do they listen to? And TED does come up because it's quite a nice little way of learning. You can slip it into your lunch break or whatever. And these are some of the ones that they've listened to and really enjoyed listening to. But again, it's just a case of being aware of this kind of stuff and then taking that time out to think, how can I actually form this habit and do better at it? Like I said, all this kind of stuff will be available after, so you don't have to worry about what you might be missing. So pragmatism is the habit number 2. But the interesting thing about pragmatism, what does it actually mean? Because with habits, about what can we actually physically see somebody doing? So actually, this is the Greek translation, and that's what they reckon that pragmatism is, which doesn't really help us very much. It's all a bit too vague. What we mean when we say pragmatism in PMO managers is that. Okay? So what does that actually mean, and how do you manifest itself in a PMO manager? So why have we chosen this? So this is where we see it right? So this is the pragmatism of, they understand the theory, but actually they don't implement the theory. I'm sure we all agree here that nobody does that, yeah? It's a classic case of, we've done Prince 2 training, now let's run our project according to Prince 2. We know that doesn't happen. So they understand the theory, but they also understand the context and the culture in which they're working in, which is especially interesting when you talk to contract PMO managers that are switching and swapping that context and that culture a lot more than maybe somebody that's in a permanent role and is doing it for a long term. So those people need to be able to do that quite quickly in order to be effective. If we do what works best, which actually is all about saying it's the experience. So the experience that they've got over time, they're able to pick and choose out of their experiences about what is going to work in this context and culture against this particular theory you might be looking at. So if you take up a risk or change or whatever process you want, it's about picking the things that are going to work best in that particular environment. The other thing about PMO managers that's really interesting is that they're not particularly great risk takers. They're actually very realists rather than the idealists. And to be fair, I think we can say that I can't imagine many organisations wanting a PMO manager that continuously takes risks. The very pure definition of what it is that you're there to do is to bring some bit of control, a bit of governance, that kind of thing. So actually, it's not about keeping it too simple in what they're doing. So they've got the theory, they've got the practice and the experience, and we keep hearing this thing of, like, let's keep it simple. Simple things work. But the knack is that you don't actually dumb it down in that whole process of keeping it simple. So it's finding that balance. Third habit is something that is purely installed in the whole PMO ethos, I suppose. We live and breathe this every day, but it makes me think, when I look at some types of PMO managers and we're talking about how effective they are and the ones that are deemed to be successful, what are they actually doing in the process and the order of their work? And the plan, do, check is about being able to, everything that we're doing. You think about all the PMO management role is about putting in process, or it might be putting in method or making changes to stuff. So, but how many people actually do it in a very regimented or a method way? And this is the Deming cycle. I don't know how many people have come across it, but actually this is all about how we do process implementation better. But how do we bring attention to detail in what we're doing when we're putting in processes? But also, actually, this is something that should be ingrained in a good PMO manager. So what I mean by this, and the things that really that struck me when I looked at Deming, and I thought, actually, this is really nice, because if you look at the plan side of it, thinking about a PMO manager's role, one of the first things that they're really good at is a problem well defined is a problem solved. So they really think about what it is that we're trying to achieve with maybe a change in a process or whatever. They also think about the Kipling's 6 honest men. Do we know about Kipling's 6 honest men? Who, what, why, where, when, how? So they're actually thinking about, so if I'm thinking about the planning bit, am I thinking about everything that I need to think about? And if you think about the do bit of it, what I quite liked was the fact that you will test what you're doing in different conditions. So some PMO managers can be guilty of, we need a new process for this, let's develop that process and let's put it out there. Bob's your uncle, it's done, it's delivered, let's move on to the next thing. But actually, I'll be really thought about, not all our stakeholders, not all our projects, not all our project managers actually want the whole kit and caboodle. So have we actually tested it under different conditions? The other thing that I really liked is that we have to make sure we document observations. We are asking people to document things all the time in projects, but do we do it as PMO managers when we are doing our day job, which is about process improvement and things like that? So just something else that it jumped out to me. But also, as you're doing it, you start your analysis of how effective it is as you are in do mode, which means that when you come to the C bit, which is the checking bit, that's when the real analysis starts. But do we do lessons learned? You know, does anybody do lessons learned? That's another thing altogether. However, it was another thing that made me think, do we do lessons learned on our own PMO job or putting in good functions and services? Good project manager, PMO managers do. And the other bit about the action bit is the fact that it's a continuous improvement, that there's going to be constant change and constantly adapting to those conditions that we're working within as the projects, as the organisation changes, the projects and programmes change. Do we actively see this as a continuous improvement, but also do we see it as something that allows us to build knowledge and to continually adapt against what's happening? And actually, one of the things that have come out of a lot of PMO Flashmob conversations is that we're all interested in maturity. That seems to be the thing at the moment, well, along with other things like portfolio and agile and all the rest of it. But actually, from a PMO point of view, we're really interested in how do we make our PMOs more mature and therefore adding value to the organisation. So the habit number 4 is about playing in position. What this means is, and it's actually a poker term, I don't know if anybody here plays poker, but it actually comes from, and I really like that. So where you sit is the difference between winning or losing a hand. So good PMO managers actually really do think about where they sit in the whole thing. So this is about working where you should, rather than working where you think you'd like to. This is about you recognising that you're not the decision maker. So it's come out of a number of conversations, including when we've done around the table with PMO managers. But actually, they get into their heads that because we are creating information from data that allows our senior execs to make decisions, some of them can overset the mark and feel like that they should be making those decisions on the behalf of the executive. So that's what playing in position is all about. And it's also about covering your own bases. So we like to get our head turned like magpies with the next nice new sparkly thing. Agile, case in point, how many times have I heard, oh, our organisation really wants to get into agile stuff. Now we're going to start looking at that. Actually, it's about knowing that if you're going to try these new areas, are you covering your own bases? I suppose the business as usual PMO stuff. And actually, if things are not needed anymore in terms of your functions or services, that you actually stop doing those things before you start getting your head turned onto something that looks more interesting and more exciting. So playing in position, I believe, actually starts with your job specification, your roles and responsibilities. It's often in there about what authority you have, what influence that you have. So it starts with that as you start in an organisation. But it also then depends on, obviously, the organisation that you're in, the context and the culture that you're working within, especially culture, and what they think about in terms of being able to move around, make decisions on certain things, not on others, or is it actually quite a controlling environment where you're not able to do that kind of stuff? So it has a big influence, obviously. The other thing is self, actually, because this kind of playing in position has a really interesting impact on who you are as an individual. And you will have seen on the stand today, we've launched some new PMO research, which is about the different types of personalities and engagement styles of PMO managers. And I think this is quite interesting in terms of where you play in your position will rely very much on what kind you are. So the research that came out was that the greens were very process, control, governance, and the other dominant colour is yellow, which is all about being a bit more creative, a bit more personable, that kind of stuff. So we have two opposites in terms of what you see as PMO managers. So if you just take that as a very basic, how does that impact? So where are you? Yeah, and that will very much impact what kind of position playing you're doing. Are you cautious or are you a bit more outgoing? It has a big bearing. The other one is about knowing your overall value in the whole game plan. So this is partly related to, well, where does your PMO sit in the wider organisation? If you're going to be at a portfolio PMO, you'd like to think that you've got a bit, something going on there, whereas if you're down at a project PMO, perhaps your value potentially is not as noticeable, for want of a better word, but it has a bearing on, do you actually understand where your value is in the overall game plan of the PMO? It's an interesting one because when you talk to people, I mean, you imagine at Flashmobs, there's a lot of people coming along that we never met before. So you have a chat and you'll say, well, what kind of PMO are you working in? What does it do? Is it objective? And then you start to get a feel from the way that they're talking that gives you an idea about how senior that person might be, just because of the way and the things that they're talking about. And again, one of the biggest catchwords is adding value. We want to be seen as adding value. So actually, do you know your value in the overall game plan today? And potentially it gives you some ideas about, well, whether you want to change that value. The other one that is definitely of interest for a really good habit is understanding things like organisational network analysis, so ONA. So this is about your whole position in terms of the whole organisation and the relationships and the links that you make with other people and what they're like and what are those interactions and what are the expectations and all this kind of stuff. But actually, are you aware of what's going on around you and your PMO and so on. And then finally is about the politics. Actually, are you a political player or not? Are you recognise politics but you choose to shield away because you don't have that much influence? Or actually, is there a way to navigate through the politics in order to be able to get what you need when you need and so on? Again, good PMO managers are able to think about this, not necessarily always effective, but they're aware. And isn't that half of the battle, that you are aware of what's going on in and around your PMO?
So back on the Geordie accent, get your ears tuned in, just for the final three habits then. So the fifth habit we would say that effective PMO managers do is challenge, okay? And it's quite interesting, we're collecting some good and bad habits on the wall, and one of the bad habits people said is for not challenging. So that kind of ratifies kind of some of our thinking. And when we're talking about challenge, let's kind of talk about what we don't mean, yes? It isn't about arguing. It's not about winning the argument about whether something should or shouldn't happen. Definitely not what it's about. And it's not about usurping any kind of authority over projects, programs, or portfolio decisions, yes? That just kind of makes everybody kind of very annoyed. So from a PMO manager's perspective, it's very much around playing the critical friend, yes? Being there when somebody says, does your bum look big in this? You say, yes, it does. Get a different colour, okay? That's the kind of critical friend you want when you're kind of playing around on your projects. The whole purpose of that is that from a PMO perspective, you are there, yes, to help the organisation understand what decisions they're making and the implications and the potential knock-on effects, okay? So it's about holding the mirror up to the organisation. Anybody spotted anything else? There may be a few elephants in the room, yes? Part of our role of the PMO is to actually kind of be open and honest and to call out that elephant, yes? And very often, we all kind of skirt around it, and there are very often in organisations lots of elephants. Sometimes it's around governance, sometimes it's been about people not being held accountable, sometimes it's about behaviours, yes? And part of our role to ensure is to kind of call that out and to recognise the fact that actually, if we want to do the right projects and do them well and deliver them on behalf of the organisation, we need to be an open and honest broker. Yes, so we cannot take sides around kind of two varying kind of points of view. We have to be there to be able to kind of say, this is the way it's at, these are the implications, and if you make this decision, this is likely or this may happen. The decision making always sits back with the decision makers in the organisation. So the sixth habit is about coaching and mentoring. Effective PMO managers are not precious about what they know and the skills that they have. They are more than happy to share them across the organisation. And actually, I think it makes our job an awful lot easier. I've also put in there feedback. So going back to this kind of the point we made at the beginning around behaviour being things that we do and the things that we say, we should be providing feedback about the things that people do and the things that they say around the project, and particularly for our own staff. And I've always loved this quote. I keep trying to give my kids fishing rods, but they're not having any. Yes? So it's about actually, there's a lot of conversation we've had at the stand around kind of how much kind of support and how much we need to hold the project manager's hands or the program manager's hand on things that we actually think they should be able to do themselves. But actually, whether we actually know themselves on how to do that is perhaps another thing altogether. I was speaking to somebody at the stand yesterday who said, I know how to use ARM, which is their risk management system, but actually I spent some time with somebody from the PMO, and actually they taught me how to make it sing. Yes? So we actually kind of go past and spend time with the individuals out there. And from a kind of a coaching and a mentoring perspective, potentially there are 3 groups that I would say we need to do coaching mentoring to. Okay, so the first one is your team, yes? So if you work in a PMO team, we shouldn't be precious or territorial. It's my job to do risks. I'm in charge of the planning tool, yes? We should be happy to kind of share that knowledge. And if they're your staff, then it's actually part of your line management responsibilities. So what we want to do is we want to increase their knowledge, we want to increase their capability so they can add, as we've already said, more value to the organisation. Project managers, and I always think it's kind of one of the interesting things is being in a PMO, there is an expectation that you actually know as much as the project managers do about their project and projects, but without doing that overtly, yes? So we should be there to be able to kind of help guide and support the project manager, and very often it's because we might see things or we have some additional kind of skills and capability that we can share with them to make their job easier and potentially to make our job easier. Now, the really interesting crowd is the sponsors and the execs. Yes, so I've done quite a bit of work with some boards of directors, and we're never allowed to hold a workshop with a board of directors, yes, all at once. We have to meet them individually first. That's any kind of consulting I do. I have to meet all of the boards of directors individually first, so they don't demonstrate their lack of knowledge and skills and capabilities kind of to their peers. So I always love those pieces of work. And very often the sponsors and the exec are by their very nature kind of senior in the organisation, and they don't necessarily like being told they don't know how to do their job and you can help them to do it better. And very often one of the kind of the real skills in being able to coach and mentor some of the sponsors and execs is to ask them questions. Get them to think about things in ways that they've never been done before. And I'm conscious of the time, but I'm going to tell a story. I was doing a piece of work with some sponsors who are board of directors in a large stationery company, and I was over in, I can't remember the place, into Germany and turn left, Holland. I was in there and with the board of directors, and we were generally talking about the role of the sponsor. And we got through the project life cycle, and yes, we'd gone live, we'd all had the implementation party, and thank you very much, Mr. Project Manager, you've done a fantastic job, not a penny over budget, bang on time, we would love that, but thank you very much. And then I kind of turned around to the board and said, right then, so now we've got to kind of deliver the benefits. So who's left to deliver the benefits? And I'm not joking, this international director said, who, me? Yes? So I'd never actually said, you're now left to do the benefits. So it's by asking the question and making them go through the thought process. They are much more able to accept their thought processes developing and them increasing their knowledge and capability. Always great fun playing with the sponsors and the exec. So the final habit then, and I stolen this shamelessly from Stephen Covey, is sharpen the saw, because I absolutely believe this. It is really important, both for our own personal development, but also in continuing to drive our organisations forward, that we continue to do this kind of self-development and also sometimes kind of self-preservation about making sure we are aware of what's in and around the place. Now, I did a dissertation a few years ago on professional judgment and what it meant to be a professional. And one of the interesting things about being a professional is that you keep up to date with all of the stuff that is happening in your industry. And in your organisation, what you don't want is somebody to come to you, the PMO, and say, right then, I think we want to implement Agile, and we know what the next 3 projects to be in Agile for you to say. And how would you be spelling Agile? Yes? We need to be in a position in the PMO where we actually kind of know and we've got an idea about what that might mean for our organisation. So it is the PMO, I would suggest, is the PMO's responsibility to get out there. So whether that be at training courses, whether that be at conferences, whether you have a library like mine, whether it's a network, and that's where the PMOFlashmob, we try to give you that kind of network of other individuals where you can have those conversations. And also, we talked about you coaching, mentoring people, about having your own coach and mentor to help you continue to develop. So it's a really important, because when your organisation wants to implement something, they're not going to give you 3 months to kind of go away and find out about it. There was an expectation that you set yourself up. Classically, you set yourself up as centre of excellence. Yes? You've named yourself it, you now need to demonstrate it, yes? So you need to be ahead of the game in terms of what's coming on.
So before, how do you develop habits? No, not the Hobbit. But what we asked was successful PMO managers. How do you do some of this stuff? How do you develop habits? How do you, some of this stuff is not about training courses. It's not about, it's about developing something quite personal, really. And we just wanted to know, well, where are you getting your ideas from? And this is what they shared. These are some of the top things that they've been reading. So we thought we'd share that with you, because actually with developing an habit, it is also about thinking, you may need to be thinking of, I need to develop actually some new skills. You can only develop an habit in something if there's something there in the first place. I don't know how many people have come across the stuff like the Gladwell about how do you become successful at something. It's about putting in the hours. Hopefully this presentation today is giving you some areas to think about that you probably wouldn't have potentially come across by going on a PMO, reading a PMO book or a course or whatever. So this is about thinking about you as an individual, as a PMO manager. But also, over the course of the 2 days, it sounds really bad now, Eileen. We've left it on oh no, now we're just going to leave it on the bad habits. But what has been really interesting, I've just gone back and had a look. Two of the things that's bad habits wise is we don't challenge enough. I think we had that one. That's good. Don't do listening very well. So these people didn't know that these are the 7 things that we collectively put together. Other things were like asking people for stuff last minute is a really bad habit, which I'm sure really annoys a lot of people, and that's why BMOs get a bad name. I'm sure we can see exactly where that could come from. This is an interesting one. It's a bit psychotic. Waiting for people to make a mistake. So you're waiting for them, rather than thinking, how can I help you? How can I help you do this? But you're actually going to sit back and wait so you can blame them. I mean, that's just a bit, wow. Other things like not being visible enough. Interesting. Is that about personally? PMO manager not being visible, or the PMO? Not sharing or showing the information. So we sit there in our ivory towers collecting all this stuff in, but do we make it a habit of getting and showing people, this is why you're doing this stuff, this is when we ask for this stuff, this is what happens with it, and this is what it's driving, and all that kind of stuff. And another one that was quite interesting is expecting project managers to know how to use things like the PPM tools. And I go a little bit further about expecting project managers to be able to know how to do their job well. It's an interesting one. It's been interesting talking to the PMO managers. I mean, we talk to different people that we've met along the way that we think are particularly good at what they're doing. And this is where we came up with 7. We actually had about
12 when we started off.
Yeah. So what we will do is share those with you as we give you this presentation online. If you've not joined up PMO Flashmob, make sure you do. If you're really into PMOs, hopefully I can recognise people we've spoken to today, but if you've not had a look, do have a look, see what we're doing. We're trying to do things a little bit differently, helping you to think differently about what you're doing and help you to become the best you can do at your job. And that's it. So,
45 minutes yet, which I'd be very pleased with me. 4:15. Yeah, it's open till 4:15.
Yeah, it finishes at
Pop
8:30.
along to the PMO Flashmob stand and write in some of the good or bad habits. The other thing that we're collecting up there are some topics for some future talks. So if you think there's anything you want to talk about in greater detail, come and kind of join us and write it on our boards. And as soon as we're unmiked, we'll be there to enjoy the conversation. Otherwise, we'll be at the back for a minute if you've got some questions. Okay, thank you.